Last time we tackled the question, did black veterans attend the 1913 Gettysburg Reunion? By looking at contemporary newspapers from around the country, I think we established that they did. And today, we're going to build upon that and talk about the forgotten black veterans at Gettysburg. Which brings us to this book. It was written by Walter H. Blake, a veteran from New Hampshire who served in the Civil War. Afterwards, he settled in Vineland, New Jersey, and he attended the reunion and wrote his own account and published this book in December of 1913. Now, if you can notice, there's another name at the bottom of the cover, and it's Frank E. Channon. And here's what I think happened. Walter Blake wrote his first-hand account experiences while attending the reunion, but Frank Channon compiled some newspaper clippings, and they too were then added into the narrative. Now, watch how similar these next two examples are, and tell me if you think Blake and Channon lifted them straight from the newspaper. One long street in this camp is devoted entirely to Negro soldiers. They are treated just like the others and have been having a great time. Every evening, they get out in their street, tune up a banjo, and begin to sing all the old plantation melodies. There is always a crowd around them. Now, compare that quote side by side with Walter Blake's account from his book, Hand Grips, which was published 5 months later. One of the long streets in the camp was devoted entirely to Negro soldiers. They were treated just like the others and had the time of their lives. Every evening they would get out in their street, tune up a banjo, and sing all the old plantation melodies. They proved a great attraction, a crowd always surrounding them. It's obvious that Blake and Channon referenced and paraphrased the Virginia newspaper in their book, but it still reinforces that black vets were in attendance and given their own section of camp. However, Walter Blake had an eyewitness account about a black veteran that we'll get to towards the end of the episode. But these quotes also corroborate some of the things we discussed in the last episode, like how the black veterans sat around campfires and sang songs like Masses in the Cold, Cold Ground, and how Colonel Andrew James organized the black veterans so that they were all camped together. So far, we've talked about the Union black veterans, but now let's turn our attention to those from the South. The Commission made arrangements only for Union Negroes, forgetting that some darkies fought well in the Confederate Army. A few of these came here and found no place. They were given straw beds in the Big Tent and were found there by a group of Tennessee Confederates. When the Southerners found out who the Negroes were, they took them into their own camp, set aside a tent for them, and in every way displayed their gratitude to the old slaves. Now, compare that to Walter Blake's account from his book, Hand Grips. This time, he elaborated a bit more. There were colored men on both sides of the line. The Commission had only made arrangements for Negroes from the Union side, forgetful of the fact that there were many faithful slaves who fought against their own interests in their intense loyalty to their Southern masters. Some of the colored boys from the Southland drifted into camp on the second day, but found no tents provided for them. They were given straw beds in the Big Tent, and there, later, some of the big-hearted Tennessee delegations discovered them. It didn't take those warm-hearted Southerners long to shift their colored brethren. They took them away into their own tent and saw that their wants were attended to, a special tent being reserved for them. Regardless of the source, this claim is also corroborated by the Journal and Tribune, which is from Knoxville, Tennessee. We found no one to show us our tents, it being dark, but finally a young boy directed us to the Tennessee tents. Some of the Virginians remained with us, but at daylight went to the Virginia tents nearby. The Tennessee delegation was the most united of all the delegates of the South. From the national home at Johnson City, there were men from all the states, and among them some of the colored troops, the other Tennessee Confeds and Yanks. This next article also further corroborates the same story. It's from the Twin City Star, which was an African-American newspaper published in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Levi Miller of Relief, Winchester County, Virginia, bears the distinction of being the only colored Confederate veteran of the Civil War in attendance at the anniversary celebration of the Great Battle of Gettysburg. It is said that the Confederate camp sent Comrade Miller to the celebration at its expense. He wore his gray uniform and received marked attention. Levi Miller's story is one of the most fascinating I've uncovered during this entire project. The more I researched him, the more complicated his story became, and it deserves far more attention than I can give it here. but I expand upon Levi Miller in my book, The Old Soldier Show. Check it out if you're interested. Because of the time, we don't have the opportunity to dig into every story I uncovered, but there are several additional newspaper accounts that mention black veterans by name as they returned home from Gettysburg. The Altoona Tribune report that 70-year-old Robert Johnson was injured after stepping from the train before it came to a complete stop at Port Royal. The Morning Journal of Lancaster wrote that Charles H. Thomas was overcome by the summer heat while returning home from the reunion, but recovered after receiving medical treatment. And the Roanoke Times reported that Henry Merchant, who traveled to Gettysburg with a group of Confederate veterans from Virginia, returned home after becoming separated from his companions during the reunion. None of these stories made national headlines, but together they offer another glimpse into the experience of the veterans as they traveled to and from Gettysburg. And that leads us back to the book, Hand Grips, by Walter Blake, and a story that led me on my own journey. But before I read this passage, I should note that the original contained some offensive language. For that reason, I made some substitutions, but the larger narrative is unchanged. So, here we go. Mention of the colored comrades recall a very pretty little incident that occurred on a New Jersey camp street one day. It was an incident that made some of the northern boys sit up and take notice. A giant of an old Negro, Samuel Thompson, from Mount Holly, was resting under some shade trees when along came a crowd of old Confederates. "How do you do, boss?" saluted the old colored man. Of the score of Johnny Rebs, every one returned the salute of the old Negro. Then one gaunt boy in gray went up and extended his hand frankly. "We're all glad to see you," he promised, "and we all want to shake hands with you, and to say that we have some Negroes at home just as big as you." "Deed you had, boss, deed you had," laughed the old Negro, and every one of the Southerners stepped up and followed the example of their comrade, shaking hands with their dark-skinned brother and slapping him with a kindly slap. No color line here. It's a nice story, but what caught my attention wasn't the handshake between Samuel Thompson and the Confederates. It was Samuel Thompson himself. In the last episode, I shared a quote from historian David Blight, who argued that the only blacks at Gettysburg were laborers who built the camp, cleaned the latrines, or worked in the kitchen. Building on that premise, another historian suggested that Walter Blake had probably mistaken one of those laborers as a veteran. After all, Blake never actually identified Samuel Thompson as a Civil War veteran. And we know from Blake's own book and from photographs that black laborers were working in the kitchens in the New Jersey section of camp. So the question became, who was Samuel Thompson? Was he a laborer, or was he actually one of the veterans attending the reunion? Walter Blake gives us just enough information to begin looking. He says that Samuel Thompson was from Mount Holly, New Jersey. So I started doing some research. Using the Find a Grave website, I found a Samuel Thompson buried in the Mount Moriah Cemetery just outside of Mount Holly. But Samuel Thompson is a fairly common name, so I wasn't willing to assume it was the same person. Fortunately, I only live about 30 minutes away from Mount Holly, so I grabbed my camera and took a field trip. Once there, I found a gravestone for Samuel Thompson. Although it's weathered and difficult to read, it identifies him as a member of the 22nd United States Colored Infantry. Now, the 22nd USCT saw active service during the final campaigns of the Civil War, including the Siege of Petersburg, and they were among the first Union regiment to enter the city of Richmond after the Confederate capital fell. Then, just a few weeks later, the regiment had the distinction of marching in President Abraham Lincoln's funeral procession through Washington, D.C. If this is the same Samuel Thompson that Walter Blake wrote about, and I believe there's a good chance that it is, then this simply wasn't a laborer resting beneath a shade tree at their Union. He was a veteran who had witnessed some of the most significant moments of the Civil War. Further research shows that Samuel Thompson was born in 1842 and lived until 1937, meaning he was very much alive when the Gettysburg Reunion took place in 1913. Now, I can't prove with any absolute certainty that this is the same Samuel Thompson that Walter Blake wrote about, since there's always a possibility that another man by the same name lived in Mount Holly at the same time. But given the matching name, the hometown, and the military service, I think it's highly likely that they are one and the same. While visiting the Mount Moriah Cemetery to pay my respects, I also discovered about 20 more graves of Civil War black veterans. Many of those were still alive in 1913. And I couldn't help but wonder, did any of them make the journey to Gettysburg alongside Samuel Thompson? I don't know, but perhaps one day we'll find out. When I began researching the Gettysburg Reunion, I decided to go wherever the evidence took me. Somewhere along the line, these men stopped being statistics and newspaper articles and became individuals with names, military service, and stories worth remembering. And yet, over the last century, many of those names quietly disappeared from the larger story of the reunion. My hope is that this episode has helped restore at least a small part of their place in history. As we've seen, the story of the 1913 Gettysburg Reunion is often more complicated and far more interesting than the simplified versions we sometimes hear about. Before we finish, I'd like to leave you with the names of the black veterans we've been able to identify so far. Samuel Thompson, Henry Thomas Middleton, Henry Merchant, Walter Pyle, George Derry, Charles Thomas, Robert Johnson, Levi Miller, James Otter, George Thomas, Stephen Ziegler, Cassius Mars, David Stephen, William Dixon, William White, Charles James, James Stokes, George Gibson, Mr. Brooks, Samuel Hall, Lewis Walter. Hopefully we'll be able to add even more names to this list someday. For many years, these veterans have remained scattered across old newspapers and dusty books. My hope is that by bringing their names back to the surface, we can help restore them to the story of the Grand Reunion, and remember them not as a footnote, but also as old soldiers who made one final journey back to the battlefield where history was made. If one of these veterans was your ancestor, or if your family has a photograph, a letter, a reunion badge, a diary, or a story connected to one of these men, I would love to hear from you. Every new discovery helps us tell a more complete story. History isn't finished. There are still stories waiting to be uncovered, and perhaps together we can ensure that these men are never forgotten, not only for their service during the Civil War, but also for returning to Gettysburg 50 years later and taking part in one of the most remarkable reunions in American history. Thanks for watching.